All right, it's a minute after, so we'll get started. So thank you for joining today's webinar on Public Pension Workforce Update, how DEI policies impact recruitment and retention. My name is Hank Kim, and I'm NCPERS Executive Director. Today's program is part of our Center for Online Learning, which provides remote continuing education to public pension trustees, staff, and other fiduciaries and stakeholders. Today's webinar addresses the importance, of diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, in the workplace. In honor of Pride Month, you'll hear from a panel of speakers on industry trends related to the recruitment and retention, with a particular emphasis on how public pensions can foster inclusivity and compensation equity. Today's webinar is one of many resources in support of public pension HR professionals, including the HR Roundtable, the quarterly remote meetings that we host, and the in-person Public Pension HR Summit scheduled for September 24 through 26 in Denver, Colorado. Leading us in today's webinar are Taylor Sprague, Senior Compensation Consultant for CBIZ, who will discuss broader trends around compensation and benefits. Todd Sears, CEO of Out Leadership, who will share insights into the latest research on LGBTQ plus workforce. And finally, but not least, Michelle Tucker, Human Resources Director at CalPERS, who will provide insight into their DEI strategies. We encourage, as always, audience participation. Please submit your questions using the Q&A function of this platform. Your questions will be answered near the end of the session. So with that, Taylor, Todd, Michelle, I'll turn the webinar over to you.
Perfect. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, but you might want to do view and full presentation.
Here, how's that?
Perfect.
Great. All right. Thank you, Hank. As Hank mentioned, my name is Taylor Sprague. I'm a senior consultant with CBIZ. I have been doing compensation studies and analyses for going on 7 years now, and I am located in our Denver, Colorado office. Quick overview of CBIZ. We are a business services corporation traded publicly on the New York Stock Exchange. We have a little over 6,000 employees across 100 offices in 31 states. Within CBIZ is our compensation consulting team. We are a national CBIZ practice serving clients coast to coast. We are a team of professionals who are focused exclusively on compensation, consulting, and analyses, and we have extensive experience in the public sector, specifically in public pension. The agenda for me today, I'm going to talk about our compensation survey we're in conjunction hosting with NCPERS, some labor market trends we're seeing in regards to compensation, and some equity-centered compensation management topics, or ECCM. So to start our 2024 NCPERS and CBIZ compensation consulting survey, we are currently in the process of gathering data. And so ultimately, this survey is soliciting about 80 of the most common jobs found in public funds, and we aggregate our salary survey data for those funds. And so we are anticipating some initial insights and findings to come in September. If any of you have not received an invitation email, please reach out to any of the NCPERS teammates on the call today, myself, or our comp surveys email we have listed. We do send our aggregate survey results to participants for free in return for your participation. If you don't have the resources or time to complete a file, you do have the option to purchase those results at a later date as well. We're expecting the results to be available in the fall, and we have just extended our deadline a few weeks to July 2nd. All right, some labor market trends we're seeing today. I want to start with some wages and inflation trends. So a few items you'll see on our graph here, starting with the Employment Cost Index, or ECI. This is the measure of the 12-month increases in wages. This includes civilian data for public and private workers. You'll see that listed in our chart here with our blue bar chart. Next is the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. You can think of this as the inflation rate. This is labeled here with our light blue line. And we have two wage trackers from the Atlanta Fed within the green and yellow. The green is going to be the overall tracker, and our yellow is going to be the job stayer tracker. So over the last few years, you'll see a pretty steady trend here in terms of wage growth. So anywhere from that 2.5% to 4% wage growth metric that we're seeing until, of course, 2020 hits, we start to see some large variances. So at the start of COVID or the pandemic, you see some discrepancies in that trend. So the start of 2020, we see a large decrease in our inflation rate, while wages remain the same for about a year. And then in conjunction, around a year after the start of the pandemic, we see a very large rise across the board, specifically in inflation and our wages. And in fact, our inflation rate actually surpasses our wage growth rate for the first time in a handful of years. In the middle of 2022, we see inflation as high as 9% and wage growth as high as 7% almost. After that, following through 2023 and through today, we're starting to see those numbers come back down. So middle of 23, we start to see that inflation rate come below our wage growth, and kind of the trend starting to come back before that COVID levels. So I think the takeaway here from our chart is wage growth may have peaked, but wage growth is certainly still quite high. Our second chart here is to our labor force. So piggybacking off of kind of why that wage growth grew so heavily, you'll see some yellow bar charts here, which is the employment persons, and our green charts being the unemployed persons. And so the sum of those makes up our labor force. And so again, you'll see pre-pandemic some pretty steady growth there. And then, of course, the start of 2020, we start to see some significant changes. And you'll see a very large decrease in 2020 to our labor force. And that trend has continued pretty heavily even still today. We have not caught up to those pre-pandemic levels in terms of a total labor force count. So what this means is that the smaller the labor force, the higher the competition it is for positions, which accelerates wage growth, which you'll see our largest decrease in that labor force around that middle 2021 area, which is when on our prior chart, you'll see the highest of our wage growth. Our third graph here being job openings to unemployment levels. So we have the unemployed levels there with the yellow line and our job openings with the green line, sort of a ratio graph there with our light blue. And so again, pre-pandemic, you'll see a pretty steady job opening to unemployment persons rate there, kind of ranges right a little over one job opening per unemployment persons. As soon as the pandemic starts, we start to see, again, some drastic changes. We see a large spike in our unemployment, a decrease in our job openings, and that ratio really plummeting actually to below half an open job per unemployment persons there in the middle of 2022, or 2020, excuse me. A year after the pandemic, again in 2021, we kind of see the opposite. We see the unemployment drastically decreasing, our job openings are rapidly increasing, so our ratio in the middle of 22 jumps to almost 2 open jobs per unemployed person. What we're seeing throughout 2023 and into now is, again, kind of that decline of we're coming back down to those pre-pandemic levels, but still relatively high. So we're kind of hovering around that 1.5 jobs available per unemployed persons today. Finally, a quick quits ratio. So quits is really measuring the number of voluntary employee exits in the labor market. So again, pre-pandemic, we see that kind of nice trend line throughout the years. And then the start of the trend line, we see a large decrease in voluntary quits. Of course, due to our labor market, employees aren't wanting to quit at this time. they're wanting to have that job security, right? Again, a year after the start of the pandemic, we see some drastic changes in the opposite way. So we see a huge spike in voluntary quits from 2021 to 2022. Again, with that hot labor market, we're seeing employees chasing other jobs, kind of searching for new avenues, right? Interestingly, starting in 2023 to even today, we're starting to see those quits drop again. So kind of more of a stagnant labor market. We're seeing employees are staying in their jobs more recently. So some takeaways. The labor market remains very hot still, despite some cooling. Wages have grown rapidly over the past few years, and they are likely here to stay. Equity-centered compensation management is the next topic, or ECCM. So what does that mean in terms of our compensation package and our total rewards package? It's the approach to managing compensation taking place to primarily focus on ensuring fairness, equity, and inclusivity. Few items we want to think about when we think about that total package. So fairness, is our wages and benefits perceived as fair to our employees? Equity, are we eliminating unjust pay gaps across our employees? Inclusivity, are we meeting the unique needs of our workforce? Transparency, how open are we with our communications? And DEI goal alignment, are our practices contributing to a more diverse and equitable workplace? The primary drivers behind ECCM are really kind of two buckets we're seeing right now, the social justice and regulatory buckets. Some examples for the social justice group are really that Black Lives Matter, women's rights, LGBTQ+. Some of the regulatory ones we're seeing are those history bans in terms of salary, the equal pay for equal work, and the now disclosure of salary ranges. So what does this all mean for our total compensation package, right? What are some strategies we can use to move forward to hit these goals that we're seeing in these trends? A few pillars come to mind. So first being philosophy. Is our compensation philosophy at the organization driving the correct behaviors we want to see in the future? Benchmarking pay. As we've seen, the labor market is changing. It's hot. Let's make sure and continually check in on our wages and ensure they're appropriate in comparison to market. Optimize our pay structure. Let's make sure our pay structure is competitive and yet flexible to meet these changing needs. And lastly, our salary increase process. Let's make sure we're staying consistent with how we're approaching our salary increases, but ensuring they are competitive in the marketplace. And that is all I had for you guys today. Thank you so much for having me. I think if any questions come to mind, we can navigate those in the chat. Thank you.
Thanks, Taylor. See if I can.
I'll stop sharing for you.
Here we go. Perfect. Let's see if I can do the same. Good? Awesome. Hi, everybody. I'm Todd Sears. I'm the founder and CEO of Out Leadership. We're a global LGBT business advocacy organization convening CEOs and business leaders around the world to both understand the LGBTQ business opportunity that talent presents, as well as use the economic power that these companies have to advocate for LGBTQ equality every place they do business. Just a quick background on me and how we've kind of come to be here as a starting point. I self-describe as a recovering banker. I started my career on Wall Street in the late 90s, and I went to Merrill Lynch as the first openly gay financial advisor in Merrill Lynch's 92-year history. Ended up building a book of business at Merrill that approached $2 billion from the LGBTQ market. But along the way, got Merrill Lynch to support LGBTQ rights and have the right policies because I connected the dots between business and equality. And I share that because that's the framework that I've carried throughout my career, whether it was running diversity strategy for Merrill or head of diversity at Credit Suisse. In 2010, I got laid off and I took my severance check and started Out Leadership with that same philosophy. Over the last 14 years, we've been able to convene over 140 different organizations and companies through our membership, which looks like it might be a little cut off, but to to really crystallize that conversation. And we have summits in New York, London, Hong Kong, Tokyo, Sydney, and we're launching in Toronto this fall. And we've been able to convene almost 40,000 business leaders over the last 14 years, 1,200 CEOs. We've also built 3 talent programs. One's called Out Next, which is for young LGBTQ leaders in business. We have about 5,000 young leaders that have gone through that talent program all over the world. We have one for Out Women, because LGBTQ women are also underrepresented in most spaces, just like the general population. And then the final one is called Out Quorum, which is our board diversity initiative that we launched 9 years ago. And there's some specific pension fund activity that I can speak about in just a second. But the idea of including LGBTQ folks at the board diversity level has been the key focus of that initiative, both from a policy as well as putting it into practice perspective. So I'm going to talk about 4 quick pieces of our research for this conversation, and then turn it over to Michelle to talk specifically about CalPERS, because I think it's a nice lead-in, because CalPERS is actually one of Out Leadership's members. The first piece is around self-ID, and it actually does tie in some ways to what Taylor was talking about. Because from a data perspective, you actually do have to understand who your employee base is and who you're trying to support, as well as attract and retain. When I was at Merrill in 2005, we added self-ID, but so many companies still had not over the last 10 or 15 years. And so I wanted us to build capacity for companies to understand how they can ask these questions, where they can ask these questions, and why it ultimately matters. Because I'd heard from companies, well, we can't ask that question in insert country here. And I'd say, well, I know that's wrong, because I can think of at least 2 or 3 companies that do. And so we published visibility counts, and I'm going to put links in at the end of the chat to these reports so that you can access them. But visibility counts was the first self-ID research 6.5, almost 7 years ago. And we mapped across 38 companies where they asked these self-ID questions for LGBTQ plus employees to self-identify, both in their HRIS systems, as well as their engagement surveys, as well as from the point of recruiting all the way through the talent lifecycle. And it's incredibly important from a data perspective that you do map your LGBTQ employees, not just so that you understand how they're succeeding in your organization, but also how you can protect them. And we'll talk about that in a second. Because in 63 countries around the world, it is still illegal to be gay. And here in the United States, in the last 18 months, we've had over 1,100 anti-LGBTQ bills targeting the community, rolling back protections and rights for LGBTQ people and our families. And so it really matters to LGBTQ employees that work for you how they're being protected, and you have to know who they are to be able to do that. From a self-ID perspective, 14% of Fortune 500 companies and 10% of FTSE 100 companies do share their self-ID data externally. And I think that the key piece of this is how companies are looking at it and tying it into ESG, as well as all the other things that companies are forced to look at. And there's this interesting moment that we're in right now where the US is going backwards and not requiring some of these things. And you have Republican attorneys general trying to outlaw ESG, for example. And then you have the FCA in the UK and other regulatory bodies elsewhere moving forward from a gender pay gap, equity, and reporting perspective as well. And hopefully the SEC will continue to push forward on that. On the board diversity front, I want to spend a second about our board diversity findings. As I mentioned, the Quorum initiative that we started was the first to focus on LGBTQ board diversity. And when we started, only 2 companies in the Fortune 500 included LGBTQ in the definition of board diversity. So we wrote a policy and said, here, do better. And this is where the pension funds came in. We actually worked with CalPERS, CalSTRS, New York City, and New York State pension funds almost 8 years ago to add LGBTQ to the definition of board diversity that they require for their investment mandates. We wanted to create the demand in the marketplace as well as the policy that companies and leaders could use. And you can see the chart on the left, the spike. It took a number of years, but we see the spike from 2021 to 2023. 112 Fortune 500 companies now have LGBTQ inclusive board diversity policies. We also ended up working with the NASDAQ on their board diversity requirement to the SEC. They used Out Leadership structure in that filing. And from 2022 to 2023, 1,871 companies changed their board diversity policies to add LGBTQ to be more inclusive. From a global perspective, we've continued to push this as well. Gosh, I'm bummed that there's some sort of messing up on the slides here. From a global perspective, and I'll talk about this in a sec as well, we've actually launched these board diversity guidelines for the United Kingdom, for Australia, and a month ago at the Milken Conference, we launched them for Hong Kong. And the idea of all of this is just to educate companies on how they can expand the pool of talent. It's not about having a quota of LGBTQ people on your board, but it is saying if we're not listed in the policy, just like if you're not looking at us from a self-identification perspective, then we're not in the conversation. And so most of the board diversity policies that we've seen do actually date back to 10, 15 years ago when race and gender were the only two things on the agenda. So each year we actually map the board diversity policies of almost 8,000 companies. We map the Fortune 1000, the NASDAQ, the Hang Seng, the FTSE, and the ASX. And this year's report that we'll be launching this fall will expand to 10 stock exchanges in the world. And for this slide, what I want to point out is that as you increase LGBTQ inclusion, as we've seen from every other aspect of the employee life cycle, overall diversity does increase as well. So if you can see, as companies have looked at adding LGBTQ, the gender and race, ethnicity, national origin all increase as well. So what you're doing for an invisible minority has a significant impact on other visible minorities. The global piece I mentioned, the FTSE, the ASX, and the Hang Seng currently only 8.3% of FTSE 100 companies, actually FTSE 350 companies, include LGBTQ in the definition of board diversity. In Australia, where our leadership's been for almost 9 years, the Australian Stock Exchange, only 7 out of the 200 companies include LGBTQ. And since this data was published, I'm proud to say that HSBC for Australia has changed their board diversity policy. So we're hoping that each year more and more companies are using this opportunity, and I'm hopeful that each of you on the call will download our board diversity report as well as our board diversity guidelines and share them amongst your investment portfolios and start to include this as you expand the aperture for what matters for diversity. And last but not least, Hong Kong, 5.3% of Hang Seng companies are LGBTQ inclusive. The next piece is our climate index. Each year, Out Leadership launches our climate index. This is our 6th year. And we built it 6.5 years ago to start to help states and leaders understand what the situation is for LGBTQ people across each of the 50 states. Marriage equality was a wonderful watershed moment, but it didn't solve all the challenges that LGBTQ people have. And so we wanted to create an opportunity to put together data points from HIV criminalization, which at that time, 36 states still criminalized HIV status, as well as having sex with an HIV positive person. Conversion therapy in 31 states is still legal. Trans people can't change birth certificates, et cetera, et cetera. We have 22 different data points that we look at. And each year we rank the states based off of those data points. Because how LGBTQ people feel and are allowed to live in these states directly impacts a state's economic opportunity and business outcomes. For the 4th year in a row, New York is the #1 state, and Arkansas is literally has gone down each year, and this year was the worst in our 6-year study. And if you think about the 1,100 bills that I mentioned, that is one key piece of this. The trans community has been used as a wedge and a fear-mongering opportunity for the right wing to advance a political agenda that ultimately has a very human consequence. If you have employees that are working in states like Louisiana, Texas, Florida, Arkansas, where their families are being targeted. Just one quick example, Governor Abbott in Texas literally said that families that were providing gender-affirming care to their trans youth were considered child abusers. Now, for those who don't know, gender-affirming care has been approved and medically necessary and supported by every medical major association in the United States. American Medical, American Pediatric, American Psychiatric. And yet the state of Texas said that that's not just illegal, that's child abuse. And so you have cases where there are families who have a trans child. Amber Briggle is one of them who spoke at our summit this last month. Amber and her son, Max transitioned 10 years ago and has been a healthy, happy individual. Child Protective Services entered their home to interview him, and they were basically pulled in to explain why they had supported their child. The trauma that creates for these families all across the country is very, very real, and it's very important you understand that from an employee perspective. We do a heat map, and we actually look at the polarization across the nation, which is probably no surprise, and these are the states that are increasingly the worst and the better. One of the things that came out of this year's survey was that there is literally no middle ground right now. Every state is either getting better or worse for LGBTQ people. Those 1,100 bills I mentioned were across 47 US states. And if you think about that from a business opportunity and a talent mobility opportunity, it's a massive challenge that we have to address and pay attention to. The last piece of data I want to share with you is our Out to Succeed data, which we have been focusing on through our Out Next cohort. And Out to Succeed is this is our second version of it, and we surveyed the first time. It was the first LGBTQ data survey of LGBTQ young leaders who were millennials in the US, Europe, Asia, and Australia. 4 years later, as in last year, we did the survey again. We had almost 5,000 participants globally. And there are several pieces that I think were worth highlighting for you. 80% of our young LGBTQ employees said that they were comfortable being out at work. And that's a massive increase over 36% in 2016. And so if you think about the progress that has been made on LGBTQ rights, that's incredibly important. But how that translates into business is that those young leaders, if you're out in your workplace, from our data, we also know that you're more likely to stay in an organization, to be engaged, and to be promoted. And so when companies pay attention to the safety that employees feel and the ability that they have to be themselves in a workplace, they see returns. 70% of these talent believes that being out in the workplace had a positive impact on their career. And I think back to the survey that we did almost 10 years ago, only 11% of Gen X men and 12% of Gen X women said that being out was an asset in their career. So the shift of how people perceive their LGBTQ status has been a major, major change. I'm not going to go through all the data points because we don't have quite enough time, but the last thing that I want to mention is that 86% say that visible LGBTQ plus senior leaders make an attractive employer, and that ties to Gen Z. The number one and two things that Gen Z leaders are looking for in corporate organizations that they want to join are what a company does for LGBTQ people and what they do for climate. And if you're an organization that is trying to pull back on these things, you're sacrificing your future talent. These young leaders pay attention. They know what companies are doing, and that's not just LGBTQ people, that's the overall population. Now, having said that, 20% of Gen Z leaders identify as LGBTQ, and supposedly almost 30% identify as something other than straight. So we're not talking about a 5 or 7% of the population right now. We're talking about a huge majority of the population. The positive impact that having an LGBTQ identity has on your business and your ability to do business, that's the data point that I mentioned. You can see a visual of that. And yet still, 3 out of 4 LGBTQ employees have felt uncomfortable or insulted by comments made by their colleagues. So we still have a cultural challenge, and that's not just internally, but externally in all of these states that are trying to roll back LGBTQ equality. So I will stop there and turn it over to Michelle. As I guess the last thing I would just mention is that all of OutLeadership's data and resources are available free on our website at outleadership.com. We have CEO business briefs for all 50 US states that go through the climate index that explain what the score means and what we hope business leaders do, as well as all of the other data and research that we've been publishing for the last 14 years. So I want to thank NCPERS for having me, and I will turn it over to Michelle.
Thank you, Todd. Good morning, everyone. Let me see if I can share my screen. Always a stressful moment. There, I think I've got it. All right, are you all seeing the screen? Okay, thank you. Okay, good morning, everyone. And I really think that Todd gave me an excellent segue because I just wanted to share a little bit about myself and my journey and why I'm at CalPERS. So I know you heard Todd say that 86% of people who come to an organization or who are queer, that they are attracted to an organization where there is visible leadership. So I'm Michelle. I've been at CalPERS for about 4 years now. I started right at the beginning of the pandemic. And before that, I was at another employer in the state of California for about 20 years. And one of the many reasons I was drawn to CalPERS was there were out gay leaders. Our chief of stakeholder outreach and public affairs, Brad Pacheco, was out, and it was very public in all of his, social media and everything that he shared on our website. And I also knew that we had queer representation on our board of directors. And so, that meant a lot to me because I felt like if they are out and they are here, that will be a place where I can be out and be comfortable and be myself. And, that hasn't always been the case. So I've shared that story before and often with folks here at CalPERS because I think it's really important. And even though it's not always comfortable to be out at work, I think that makes people feel a sense of safety. So I just wanted to, kind of reiterate the personal anecdote for Todd's statement. It definitely makes a difference. So CalPERS is the nation's largest public pension fund. We have assets valued at $450 billion, so we're almost at the $500 billion mark. We manage pension and healthcare benefits for close to 2 million California public employees, retirees, and their families. And then we're governed by a 13-member board of administration. So those are those directors that I spoke of, and they consist of elected, appointed, and ex officio members. So we do a lot of good work. We have a number of primary business lines, and I'm going to talk to you today about how some of the ways that we look to attract different sorts of folks to our organization, and then how we recruit and retain them. So as the nation's largest public pension fund, fostering an inclusive culture that welcomes diversity of thought, experience, and background is really vital to our mission and all of our operations. Starting in 2007, we were actually the first state agency in California to dedicate a program to coordinate and promote diversity efforts with our external stakeholders. And we developed a whole diversity outreach program at that time. And it's certainly evolved since. I know it's quite a few years after 2007. So we have a number of different initiatives. We have a 5-year strategic plan, and DEI is so important, so integral to that effort that it's not a standalone goal. It's really interwoven throughout all of those different all of our different goals. We also have a pillar view that we look at when we think about our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And so the 5 pillars for our DEI program are culture, talent management, health equity, supplier diversity, and investments. And so our goal really is to embed DEI best practices into our culture to increase awareness, to really build those rewarding relationships and foster collaboration. So I'm going to focus specifically today on 2 of our pillars, culture and talent management, and then I'll do a few other highlights at the end. For the culture pillar, we really are looking to, again, increase awareness, build those relationships, and foster collaboration. So we do a lot to that end. One of the other things that drew me to CalPERS, and I feel very proud to be part of it now, is we do really a lot of work to have teamwork and to really have, I think, a vibrant organizational culture. We have had a number of different events where people share their cultures, where, we just kind of talk about different issues. And we've had some all-team seminars that have been very successful, very well attended. We just had a wonderful one. We had Spencer West, who's a content creator, and he is an LGBTQIA+ and disability advocate. He came out and spoke to us last month, and it was, a packed house for all of his sessions, and very inspirational and moving, and just like a wonderful human. So we all really enjoyed hearing from him and his journey and his wisdom. And then last year we had Paul Epstein, who is a 2-time best-selling author, who came out and spoke to us, and he talked about the power of playing offense and better decisions faster. And so we really try to bring speakers to our organization, and our team members really enjoy that. I think it provides an opportunity to kind of step away from your day job and think about the bigger things in the bigger picture. So that's some work that we're proud of. We also developed a DEI certificate program. So this is a certification, not like, an external certification, but an internal one, where our team members can take a series of training courses and then also do a project. And once they complete all these different elements, they are kind of branded, and they can use the fact that they have completed our DEI certificate program. So in addition to the courses, I talked about a project. So they have to come up with a concept for a project, get support from their team leader, and then, kind of go through it and implement it. And then at the end of that, then they have achieved their certification status. So that's something that we've rolled out over the course of the past 2 years. We did the training element first, and then we added the project part. So we're really happy about that. And the team members that have gone through it, I think, have really enjoyed it. We also have a couple of regular advisory groups that support all of our initiatives and just really provide a way to kind of bring these speaker series to talk about important issues, and I think provide a way for all of our team members at CalPERS to engage in this work. We have a disability advisory committee, and so that participates in a variety of statewide discussions. So this committee actually several times has won the Disability Advisory Committee of the Year award from the state of California. So we're really proud of that team and all of the work that they do to advance disability awareness and accessibility. We also host monthly employee resource meetings that are around all forms of diversity. And so We are looking to have some more specific affinity groups, perhaps over the next years. I'm working to develop one that's specifically kind of pride-based for LGBTQI+ and allies, but we have currently a diversity group where we talk about different issues each month. So June being Pride Month, we're talking about pride. We have a great speaker set up throughout leadership called Ally Up. And so we're looking forward to having that speaker up this month. And then we also have a diversity, equity, and inclusion day. So this was something that was in place actually for quite a while. And then during the pandemic, it was, one of those many things that you couldn't really do. But we reintroduced it last year and it was amazing. And we had a pride booth. And if this will work, I'm going to play you a little video. So let's just give it a whirl and see if I can do this.
Diversity and Inclusion Day, also known as D&I Day, is one of CalPERS' most anticipated events. It's a day where all of the team members can come together in the organization and celebrate all the different cultures that exist here at CalPERS. Engagement is so important because when people feel engaged, it makes them want to do better. When people feel inclusion, they feel a sense of belonging. And when people feel a sense of belonging, it just makes for a better organization. Some of the activities are people dress up, they display artifacts, they serve food and drinks. It's important for us to all recognize how much diversity exists here at CalPERS and for us to really embrace all of our cultures. Diversity isn't a goal, it's a call to action. So my call to action to you is I hope to see you at the next D&I Day.
Okay, good. I successfully switched slides. So that was our D&I Day, and it was really great. And the slide that I'm showing right now is our Pride booth. So that's me in the front. And that was a wonderful event. And it was so timely because I had just attended an event with Todd's team in New York with the Out Leadership Group. And so we had done a really wonderful activity on intersectionality and talking about your different identity groups. And so we did kind of a version of that at this event. And so you can kind of see behind, we had like a little activity where people could talk about their different identity groups and really find out everything that they had in common. And it was really wonderful. And what I liked about this is a lot of people came to the Pride booth because they were queer. And I think they wanted to know, is this a safe space? Are there other queer folks that are here? And as I was standing there talking, like a number of people came up and they're like, I'm a new hire, or, I've been here this long and wanted to know more about the Out community that we had at CalPERS. And so I think it was, again, just kind of to reinforce some of Todd's points, the importance of having a place in a way that people can, find their people, find allies. And not everyone in this photo is queer identifying. Some of the folks who were here, helping were allies. And so it was a really wonderful event and just really brought us all together, I think, in a really positive way. So this is also the image I have for talent management because, so this is a lot of these folks who are on the HR team with me. So we do a number of different things on our talent management peer for our diversity framework. So we work very hard to ensure that all of our HR processes strengthen diversity in recruitment, retention, equity, engagement, and succession planning. So we have some software that we use for all of our recruitments and all of the language that we use in our job descriptions, in our duty statements, in our actual ad language, as well as things that we put out on LinkedIn and other platforms to make sure that it's inclusive. So this is a really excellent tool. There's a number of different ways you can do that, but we really try to take time and care making sure that the language that we use is inclusive and is attractive to everybody. We promote fairness and we try to eliminate barriers with using our very meritorious system. And so, some of the foundations of HR as a discipline, and I know amongst public pension experts, you all know how important it is that HR functions as a place where people do all have access to programs and benefits and that they can all find a way to promote and see that their career can grow. And so that's really important to us. And so we really want to make sure that people have access and know how to have those connections. We have a career outreach group. So if people want to look for upward mobility or talk about promotions, they have a place where they can go and help prepare. And sometimes that's something also that I think can be a limitation for any type of team member, but particularly I think folks in the queer community can really need somebody who will listen and who will, meet them where they are. We have expanded some of our training and career development opportunities. So we do have a couple of different training sessions that we do for team leaders on the recruitment process to make sure that we eliminate implicit bias to the extent that we can. We want to make sure that we're doing that. We have a variety of initiatives where we are masking or anonymizing names and different identifying information on application materials so that we can really make sure that those decisions on screening and selection are based on qualifications. We also have publicized our DEI commitment through an employee self-reporting survey that I'm going to talk about in a minute. And then joining Out Leadership, I think has, I'm not trying to be a commercial here for Todd, but it's been cool. We've used it to promote a lot of our things on LinkedIn. I think that it is a very visible way for CalPERS to show that we do support LGBTQIS causes and the work and the business community and the people. So we're really proud of that. And then to go back to one of his earlier comments, we do have 3 ways that we capture or we provide self-identification for our team members. One is in the application system. There is a way for team members to identify, or candidates, because they're not team members yet, their self-identity. And then with our engagement surveys, which I'll show in a minute, we have an opportunity there. And we are currently in the process of upgrading our HRIS system. So that will also have a way to identify that. So that will really give us, I think, much better visibility into our different candidate pools and team members. Right now, we do have those methods, but they're not fully integrated. So that'll be a big help. And then I just wanted to quickly talk a little bit about some of our other DEI initiatives. And I know I don't want to go over my time, but I did talk about the 3 other pillars that we have. So we do have a health demographic profile that we use in our CalPERS system. So this is for all of our members, so not the CalPERS employees, but the members of our system. And so having folks self-identify and self-report their demographics helps us to achieve better health outcomes. We're able to track them throughout their lives and really see, what interventions help, where different folks have different health needs. And so that's been really successful on that effort. We also invest in private equity for diverse and emerging managers. So this last year, we had dedicated $1 billion, so $500 million each to 2 of our partners, TPG and Grosvenor. And then we also invested $400 billion in other diverse and emerging managers just through the regular course of our work in private equity. So that was just work that we were regularly doing, and the managers that received that happened to be diverse and emerging managers. So that's another way that we're very proud of our work in the DEI space. And then I think I mentioned this, that we do have some pretty visible out leaders here at CalPERS. There's me, there's Brad that I mentioned, who's our external affairs type of deputy. And then we also have a board member who is part of the queer community. So I think that really makes a difference to folks when we're able to talk about that, and they can see that, representation matters to us and we're here. We've installed gender neutral bathrooms, which was something that, was really needed, and I think provides a sense of safety and availability to our team members. So that was another initiative that we took just in terms of our facilities. And then I mentioned it, we have an upcoming Pride event this month with Out Leadership. So we have Ally Up, fostering positive workplace culture through LGBTQ plus allyship. So we're excited about that. Then this last slide, I thought, I think is really cool. So I mentioned that we do an annual engagement survey. We also do survey team members at a couple of other points in the employee life cycle, both at onboarding. We administer an onboarding survey at 15, 45, and 90 days to measure folks' engagement. And then we also do an exit survey to measure engagement at that time. And some of the questions that we ask are similar, but the one where we really look and kind of benchmark ourselves from year to year is our annual engagement survey. So the last cycle that we completed was 2023. Prior to that, in 2022, our numbers for members of our LGBTQI plus queer community were not as high as I think we wanted them to be. They were a bit lower than our team members who identified as heterosexual or straight, and you can see that displayed here in the slide. So we have been at the forefront in asking self-reporting questions, at least with the provider that we're using, which is Perceptix. And so they've been a great partner to us in developing the questions and measuring this work. And it's really important to us that we engage or that we assess engagement levels of all of our different identity groups. We measure engagement by asking questions about team members' intent to stay, their pride in the organization, and their intrinsic motivation. Team members respond to the questions using a 5-point agreement scale, and the results are summarized as a favorability score, meaning that the percentage of team members who selected strongly agree and agree versus the other 3 choices. So based on the 2023 survey results, members of the queer community are equally as engaged as the heterosexual community. This is an increase of 17.3 percentage points from the previous year. And so that makes me very happy. All of us at CalPERS are really happy about that. And it's important that our LGBTQI plus members are engaged. This is a difficult one because people say like, well, why did that change? Like what drove that? And I can't tell you with 100% certainty, but I know this same year we joined Out Leadership. So that's the thing that happened. And we did a lot of talking around at that time, so Brad and me and a lot of us just really talked about that and what that meant to us. I think that it's just a much larger part of being in a conversation. And I think people know that we're a place where you can belong and be your full self, and that we're better when everyone can do that. So I think I would definitely attribute part of it to that. And then our employee engagement survey also asks team members if they feel that they really belong at CalPERS. And based on the 2023 survey results, our queer community was slightly below the heterosexual community, but even though it was slightly below, it still was a significant improvement of 13 percentage points compared to the previous year. So again, really pleased with this positive trend in growth. And I'm personally, as a member of the community, I'm very happy. And I like that my queer fam feels the same way as I do. So that's all my slides. So I can stop sharing now and turn it back to Hank.
Great. Thank you, Michelle, Todd, and Taylor. So we have a number of questions in the Q&A section. Some of them have already been answered through the platform. So if you did post questions or if you're curious about the answers, take a look at the answer tab. The open questions, let me begin with the first one. What are some of the visible actions organizations and employees can begin to do for LGBTQ plus folks to feel safe in disclosing their status? Because we can only speak on the statistics of who are visible, but how can we begin to promote, especially for employees who are thinking twice about disclosing their status?
I'm happy to take a first pass at that, and it does kind of tie into a couple of the other questions as well later on in terms of implementing DEI without feeling disingenuous, and a couple of the other pieces there too. Something we've learned in terms of the self-ID process is that you do have to share with employees how the data is being used, who actually sees the data, and why it actually matters. So if you just tell them it's going to go in some HR database somewhere, we're not necessarily going to share our information with you because, as we've talked about, in a lot of places it's risky and becoming even riskier. But if you do talk about the fact that it allows you to then track progress from a career perspective, give people opportunities. One example is that some of our companies have used it as an opportunity to invite young leaders to Out Next, which is the 5 to 7 year in career program that we have, so that people see outcomes. And I think what Michelle shared in terms of like the increase in engagement is a great example of that. She would not have been able to understand that LGBTQ employees were more engaged because of some of the work they've done had she not had that data. From a privacy perspective, that is the number one concern. And one of the things, I'll use IBM as an example. When they rolled out Self-ID probably 12 years ago, they did a major campaign and said that only one person in the company, this very, very senior person, was able to see people's data. So the CEO couldn't see it. You could only see it in groups larger, I think N equals 10 or more. And having people have comfort around the fact that their data won't be seen by anybody, I think is another piece of it. You can also ask a secondary question. So once you ask LGBTQI status, you can also ask, can the company contact you, or can the employee resource group reach out to you? And if people check no to that, that's a great opportunity for it to be self-reinforcing that that data is going to be private to them. So it is always an undercount because there will always be people who will not feel comfortable self-reporting. And you generally see the trend continue to increase over the years, your first year, 5-year, 10-year. I'll use HSBC as an example. When they first started, it was around 2%. And now they ask self-ID questions in 49 countries, and 8.9% of their employee base identifies as LGBTQ. So it has been a very positive trend, but they have to work at it at a specific country level as well.
Thanks, Todd. Michelle Taylor, any other comments?
Yeah, I wanted to add on to what Todd said about the anonymity of the data. So we do have the engagement survey that we do every year that I mentioned, and it is anonymous. No one in our organization can see the names. Even the HR folks who work on it, myself included, don't know who identified as what, and it is optional. So we see every year that there are people who choose to not disclose, and it's not just their sexual orientation or gender identity. I wanted to be clear that even though we talked today about sexual orientation, we also ask a question about gender identity, and there are some options there. And we also ask about ethnicity status and a couple of other statuses. We ask about disability status, veteran status. So there's several different ways that they can self-identify. And we look at what percentage of people decline, where they say, we don't really want to answer that question. And that's, perfectly fine. That's their choice. And so those percentages don't vary a great deal across those different groups, I would say. I think the group that we saw that had the largest decline to say it was actually the ethnicity. So that is something that, we're actively working to do to make people feel a sense of safety in that, to be reassured that no one is seeing their individual contributions, that when we do report on it, we report on it in aggregate. And even today in preparing this presentation, we were really careful that everything that we showed and shared, that it was something that we'd shared before with our organization, and that it wasn't something that people, were surprised at. In terms of other things through the HRIS system, when we're able to track that, again, that will be, optional for people to disclose. And I think that will help us know where we're successful. And I hope that in time, when people see the good work that we intend to do with it, I'm over HR, and I'm here to make sure that everyone is treated fairly and equitably. Like, that's my job. And I take it really seriously. So I hope that we'll see that grow over time.
Next couple of questions, I think they're for you, Michelle. It's asking about the software that you use, as well as, or it might be the same question. What software do you use to ensure inclusive language?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So there's a number of different software providers that do this. The one that we're using is called OnGig, ONGIG. The first G is capital. But there's a number of different groups that provide this. And our sister fund across the river, CalPERS. I say it's across the river, but you all aren't in Sacramento, but there's a river and we're on one side and CalPERS is on the other. But there are our sister fund here in Sacramento, and they use a different provider as well. So I know it's something that is out there and it's available. In terms of, did you want me to answer another question, Hank, or are those both the same?
I think they're both the same, but if you think they're different, or if you have a different response to it, the first one, feel free.
No, I think that sounds like it's the same. Yeah.
Okay. And then real quickly, Todd, I think you answered something through the chat, but you'd like to build on that.
Well, it was the question around trans and trans people being straight. So gender identity versus sexual orientation and lumping that together. And I just commented that I know Michelle looks at it that way. And I think it's also important, as I put in the chat, that trans folks who have transitioned oftentimes do not identify as trans any longer in your self-ID surveys. They identify with their correct gender. So you will see sort of variation based off of that and being aware of that. So heterosexual versus LGBT versus T. Obviously, breaking down those metrics does matter.
Great, thank you, Todd. Another one for you, Michelle. For CalPERS anonymous hiring process, what metrics are HR tracking? Has the process increased more diverse hires at CalPERS?
So some of the changes to that software platform are currently being rolled out. So I don't have an overarching response to that. But what I can talk about is an effort that we did last year. We did an event called a rapid recruitment event, where we tried to fill a number of positions over 6 different occupational groups really rapidly, hence the name. And what was really cool about that was that because we were doing it as a large CalPERS effort, we did redact a lot of the identifying information. And the group that we hired was twice as representative of historically underrepresented groups as the rest of our company profile. So I feel like that is a pretty strong measure of success. It was one hiring initiative. It wasn't, everything that we've ever done, but I'm really proud of that. We're all really proud of that. And I think that's a strong sign that as we continue to redact identifying information, that we'll see that grow.
Great. And Todd, you referenced this, but did you want to expand on the question about, how do we make, DEI feel more genuine versus disingenuous?
Yeah, there's a guy named Martin Davidson whose philosophy I really like. He's a professor at Darden School, and he talks about managing diversity versus leveraging difference. And if you're managing diversity, it's a problem to be solved, and it only focuses on the 6 areas of visible difference. And oftentimes when we talk about this data piece, that is the focus of the conversation. But the ultimate reason that we're doing it is because we know that we want to leverage difference. And if you look at it from an opportunity, not a problem perspective, all relevant differences matter. And it's not just the visible pieces that we're measuring with HRIS systems, but it's the perspectives that people bring in their backgrounds and all the other things that you look at when you're trying to create diversity. And I think if you frame all these things in that way, and the metrics are how you measure the outcome versus starting with the metrics, and Michelle's point's exactly right? She's looking at engagement, and those are the outcomes. Those are leading indicators. Representation is a lagging indicator of your culture. You can't change a lagging indicator. So too often in the past 30 years, companies are like, oh, we don't have enough insert blank, whatever that is, women, people of color, LGBT. Let's go hire more of those people. That doesn't work. That's the disingenuous part. You're hiring people because of a visible identity, not their talents. If you're looking at it more from an engagement perspective, that's actually what you can change, and figuring out what keeps people at your company and helps them succeed. And the diversity metrics are just one piece of that. And I think that framing is really important to making it not feel disingenuous. And just quickly, there was a question around the people of color and LGBTQ folks as well. And our survey, Out to Succeed, which we can share with you all, we did have overrepresentation of people of color and trans folks in that survey. And you're absolutely right. There is a significant difference. If you have multiple identities, discrimination does add up, and people are much more likely to report lower engagement and more challenges based off of race, in addition to the orientation and identity status.
Great, thank you. And we did have some questions from the audience before the webinar started. So let me start with some of those. And third, let me start with you, Taylor. Does the recent decision on affirmative action hinder efforts for more inclusive teams?
More inclusive what, sorry?
Teams, or more inclusive hiring.
Sure. Can you repeat the question again, sorry?
Yes, yeah. Does the recent decision on affirmative action hinder efforts for more inclusive teams?
I don't think it hinders in anything in regards to being inclusive in the hiring space. I think as Todd sort of mentioned, the hiring is based on sort of what employees are bringing to the table for specific jobs and nothing more.
Another question, I'll throw it out open to the group. What financial investments are public pensions making into LGBTQ funds and companies? Michelle, I think you touched upon it, but if you want to expand on that or repeat what you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and full disclosure, I don't work on our investment side, but we did actually recently, this was just reported at our board meeting earlier in the week. So on our private equity space, we have an emerging manager program. And so we've provided $1 billion to 2 different groups to use for diverse and emerging managers. And then we have $400 billion in investments that we've just made through our regular private equity investment process that happen to be in firms that are diverse or emerging managers. And then, we have a number of different investments. That's probably, I think, a future conversation, but it's definitely something that's really important to our board, and it's really important to our CEO and our whole organization. Every time we have our investment committee report to our board, there's a lot of conversation about how the work that we're doing and the investments we make number one, they have to help make sure that we have retirement available for all of our members. That's our primary duty to our members. But also, when we can, how do those investments, help promote the values that we have as an organization? So I think that hopefully gives you enough information, but if you have specific questions, I'm happy to take that back and get more detail.
Great, thank you. Well, we are at the top of the hour. So let me close by thanking each of you, Taylor, Michelle, Todd, for sharing your expertise and knowledge with us today. And thank you, the audience, for joining us. Our next webinar is scheduled for July 10th on how public pensions reduce income inequality. Our own Dr. Michael Kahn will preview his soon-to-be-released research paper, The Hidden Costs of Pension Reforms, Rising Income Inequality, Lagging Economic Growth. He will be joined by Josh Bevins, researcher with the Economic Policy Institute. Let me close by referencing one question about the presentation. They will be made available. A quick aside, apologies to Todd and to the audience. We had a little snafu in terms of Todd's slides. We will get that corrected and send it out to everybody. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we look forward to hosting you in July. Bye-bye.
Yes.